Hello all and welcome to week 2. I know this first week was a lot in getting into Maya, and I will look and try to grade your first practice assignments as soon as I can. And then this week we are taking, the whole week to tweak your models to make sure that they will be ready for next week when we actually get to bring them into Mudbox. Make sure you're checking the assignment guide for your milestone 1. You're going to need to turn in, your front and side view if you chose to do a back or, any other top, bottom. Feel free to turn those in as well. And then we need a perspective view. And perspective is a little bit difficult of a drawing to come up with because this isn't going to line up with the other ones that you did. It's going to be more of a 3/4 view. And this helps you to really visualize how your 3D model should be when it's all said and done. And then make sure you're also attaching your references. I know our discussion board went in depth as to why pre-production is so important, so make sure you're turning in everything that needs to be turned in for this week. So in Maya, I know I've had a lot of questions about UV unwrapping and mapping and what that means and what that does. So let's take a look. In the more recent versions of Maya, probably going back at least 3, we have what is called automatic mapping. And this is a great new addition because you can kind of say, I'm not sure what shape I have, but I can do automatic. And then we've got cylindrical, planar, and spherical, camera-based, all that stuff. Let me rewind so we actually know what we're talking about, but I want you to know this is under your modeling dropdown, and then UV, and your options are here. So what is unwrapping and preparing for mapping? Well, I like to think of it as like wrapping a gift. You have a 2D image, whether you painted something in Photoshop or you found something, CG Textures is a great website to use. It's copyright free and a lot of times they have tileable images. But when we go to texture something, you need to tell the program how should we take this 2D flat image and put it around our shape, aka wrap it around our shape. Maya is a very, very smart software, but it can't quite comprehend all of that on its own, so we have to tell it. So kind of the easiest way to think about this is looking at a planar map. So UV and then planar. Imagine, in the classroom, if I were using a projector right now, we have the screen that it projects on is a flat plane. And we're taking the image and we're shining it right onto the plane so it's flat and it lines up and looks great. But if I go and stand in front of that projector, you'll notice that the image warps because I am not a flat shape. I am 3D and I have different parts. My nose comes out further than my cheeks. My shoulders are further back. So you're not going to get a nice flat image there. So that's why we have other options. So let me just show you 1 second. So we can grab any shape. I know that you guys are working on your particular objects, but it's kind of a good exercise to try with different shapes and see what you can do. So, for example, if I click and I create a sphere, to apply a texture, I right mouse click and hold, and I can go to Assign New Material. UV unwrapping, again, is just how is that 2D texture going to go on our 3D space. So it's all about texturing, and it's all about telling Maya where you want certain textures to go. So I'm just going to do a Lambert as an example. Lambert is a matte, Blinn is a shiny, reflective material. Those two are kind of your basic standards for textures. I'm sure you'll take a texturing class where you'll learn about, all of them and when to use them, but for the sake of just our class, and we're really just preparing the UVs for this, you can put on texture if you would like, but we're going to create our texture in Mudbox. So this is just making sure that you're set up and ready to go for it. All right, so I've assigned my Lambert 2 here, so I want to look in my attribute editor and see. So you have color, so if I wanted to apply, base color, let's say green, you can see. But then we have this checker box here, and this allows us, we can put on a file, so if you did create something in Photoshop or get something from the internet, you can do it from here. I'm going to just put on a checker pattern for right now. You'll notice you don't see anything. You need to hit 6 on your keyboard, and that will allow you to see. So I'm going to click on my sphere. I have not done any unwrapping or applied anything to it. This is just the base sphere as it's made. And I can go to UV and then my UV editor. Okay? The UV editor has the same navigation as your viewport, but what this is doing, I'm going to turn this, which makes it just a little bit grayer so we can see. This is how, if I'm going to wrap my sphere in wrapping paper, how the 2D texture is going to be applied. So you can see all my planes, my square, quad planes are nice and even, and so the texture gets put on even. But then in our top and bottom here, we get the zigzag pattern that creates this. So this is working really well. Let's see, though, if I go into object mode, and I'm going to apply a planar map, which means, again, I'm going to just shine the image like it were a plane. So I'll go to UV, planar. Now you can see my planar map lined up and put the sphere in the center, but now this, if we look in my UV editor, it's giving me a sphere shape, which works well until you go to look at the top and you see that I'm getting these straight lines. That is because I shined that planar map directly from the front, so it mapped it out perfectly if you look from here, but it didn't get the depth of the top. Now you can put certain maps only on certain faces. You don't have to do the whole object. So let's say if I were going to put a face on this, mouth, eyes, and all of that, I could go into face mode, select whatever faces I wanted, and then I could just do a planar map on those. Okay? So you can see that's a different map. I just want you to know that, so if you do have, maybe several pieces to your object, or you need them to be kind of mapped differently, you can totally break up your shapes by faces. But let's go back into object mode, and since we have a sphere here, we can probably take a guess that a spherical map is going to work best. And you can see the difference in my UV editor. You can move, rotate, and scale, again the same in the viewport, but you're going to want your whole map to fit inside this top quadrant here. So if I do have several maps, you're going to want to kind of scale them and move them so that you have room to fit all of them in this quadrant. Alright, so we've talked about planar, spherical, cylindrical is the same if you have a cylinder. Now I completely understand that for all of your projects you're not going to have just the base shape and be done, but you want to think about what shape did you start with to kind of get a good guess. When all else fails, and by fails it doesn't mean that it's not good, just when maybe none of those shapes really fit, that's when we can do an automatic map. So I'm just going to add some very random extrusions to my shape here just to give it some depth. Okay. So I'm going to do, we can go into object mode, and then you can just go to UV automatic. And what automatic does is, as you can see, is it breaks apart your object, puts it all in this top quadrant, but it's based on a 6-plane camera system so that you're getting the best views from each side no matter how you look at it. Now this might become a little confusing in your UV editor because now they're split differently and you might not like how they've been split. Well, you can always adjust them separately. If we right mouse click and go into UVs here, UVs are in the same spot as our vertices are on our shape, but if you move these, so I'm going to click it and move, I'm not moving anything on my shape. Here, let me find one that we can actually see. If I move these, you can see my texture is moving if you look in the viewport, but it doesn't move any of my mesh. So you can kind of, move these around, scale these around, and get them to fit. The main goal is that you want, if you are using like a checker box, you want the scale of the checkers to match over your entire object. So I might need to scale some of these up or down to make it fit, but then you have it correctly UV mapped out so that when we do bring it into Mudbox, it's already set up so that we can just paint our textures onto it and it'll know which direction our faces should be shining. A lot of times when you're modeling, you may do a bridge or an extrude and merge, and Maya doesn't realize, or Mudbox doesn't realize, that your textures need to be put on the outside for us to see it. They might be reversed. So if you want to see which way your normals are facing, and again, your normals are the way that the texture is being placed on your object. Do you want it to shine from the outside or be placed on the inside? You can extend your UV editor if it's compressed. And then these buttons, when you turn on the second one here with the blue, blue means our normals are facing outward. I'm going to grab some UVs here and overlap them, which is what we're trying to avoid, but just so you can see what happens. In this section here, red means they're facing inside, and this purple means you have overlapping UVs. So that's where you're going to run into issues bringing things into Mudbox. So once you kind of get your UVs laid out how you would like them, then just click on this blue button here and it'll do the color to show you which way your normals are facing. Alright, so that's a little bit on unwrapping. We are going to go into sculpting next week, but I do want you guys to be aware of how we can bring our objects into Mudbox if you haven't already. Luckily with Autodesk, they work really well together, so you can go to File, and then you can go to Send to Mudbox. I always do it as New Scene, and you need to select everything that you want to have sent. So I'll just do Send as New Scene. You'll see at the bottom, connected to Mudbox. Now, the great thing about Mudbox is that it tells you what errors you have and points to exactly where they are. So with this one, because I have a sphere, this is warning me that one vertex, aka it's going to be the very top and bottom of my sphere, has more than 16 adjacent edges. That is just a lot of edges to be bringing into Mudbox. With Mudbox, we are going to add a lot of detail, and we're going to, at times double our polygon count. So when we're in Maya, we want to make sure we're working as low poly as possible. So, it says you can use this mesh, but beware. And again, I can see right here, it's my top and my bottom. So maybe I want to go back into Maya and decide, are those necessary? So I can go into edge mode, and I can select, some edges here and delete them if they're unnecessary. Now make sure that when you hit delete, you hold Control, and that deletes the vertices as well. If you just hit delete on the keyboard, you're deleting the edge, but you're leaving all that data with the vertices. So, and it's up to you what edges or how you go about it to clean it up. Obviously, I'd want to reshape it a little bit, make sure it was even, but for the sake of just showing you guys this, I'm going to delete these. Okay. So, and this, does change my texture, and I have to make sure what I'm doing, but again, I'm just trying to show you. So then I can go in object mode, select the shape, send it to Mudbox as a new scene, and now the error is gone. The other most common error that you're going to see is when you haven't merged all vertices together. So a lot of times when we are modeling, you might do an extrude. So let's just say I'll start with a cube. And I'm going to go into my P-cube, Polycube 1 tab, and I'm going to update how many subdivisions. I'm going to turn that up. So sometimes we grab faces and we do an extrude. So edit mesh, extrude. But then you're in the middle of something and you click off of it and then you go to do an extrude again. So I'll grab these faces, I'll do an extrude, and I'll move them up. Perfect. I'm doing a great job, I'm along the project, but then when I go to bring it into Mudbox, I get an error and I don't understand why. Well, that's because if I actually go into vertex mode and select this one vertice, you can see that I only have that one selected, but I actually have two vertices in that spot. So I need to make sure my mesh is cleaned up. To bring this little UI section out, you want to go to Display, Heads Up Display, and then Poly Count. This is really important, and I would recommend that you always just keep it up. Again, the 2 is how many I have selected. This column is how many are on my shape, and the third column is how many are in my scene. So if I had, another shape here, you can see now the difference between the shape I've selected and the entire scene. So going into vertex mode, and again selecting that, I have 2, I need to merge my vertices. So I can go to Edit Mesh, Merge to Center. And I can do that, hit G, which redoes your last action, and just make sure you're selecting it one at a time. Well, one section at a time where I have overlapping ones. Okay, and then once that's all cleaned up, you'll be set to send it into Mudbox. Lastly, for our assignments, you're going to want to export your selection as an OBJ or an FBX. FBX will allow you to turn it into the assignment board without having a large file and running into any issues. And you can also import that into Mudbox very easily. All right. This week, you also have a group discussion board. It's not located in the same area as the normal discussion, so be on the lookout for that. I'll make sure to make a point of it in the announcements. If you have any questions, feel free to let me know, and I will talk to you later.